Hey folks, this is Max82. Welcome back to another tryout. Today's tryout is on Project Malice. Ugh, I have not been on camera in a hot minute. It's been a minute. I took kind of a break. There'll be a link to the last video. If you haven't seen it, it's got some explanations in there about what went on, and it's also the last time I recorded, which was a month ago, something like that. So, hello, I am back. Not that I was really gone that long. Today, like I said, Project Malice. This is a game that I got on Steam. It's in early access, and it's interesting. It's an isometric roguelike shooter thing. I think the description on the store page on Steam calls it like a third-person shooter. I kind of, not really. It's more like a twin stick from an isometric angle, as far as I can tell. I didn't play it with a controller. I played it with mouse and keyboard. So it was more like I use the mouse to aim and WASD to move around. That's the sort of game that it is. On opening the game for the first time, you get a sort of text intro. It gives you a bit of a background on like kind of what's going on and setting up some like bits of ideas that are sort of meant to, I think, color what the experience is. It's a meta-narrative sort of thing where like the game itself, from what I've played, the like game part is an expression of the player who is caught within a narrative with some mystery narrator. You are in conflict, the player themselves, with this mystery narrator person in some capacity. And it's an interesting little setup. You're dropped into actual gameplay as a character named Tony. It's the only character that you start with. I don't know how to unlock other characters, but I know there are other characters. I don't know how many there are right now or how many there are going to be once the game actually comes out, because I don't remember if I wrote it down, but this game is an early access title. I don't know if I said that already. It's an early access title. It's also on like itch.io and stuff. It's both on Steam and itch. So there's a couple places you can get it if you wanted it. But, you know, talking back to actually talking about the game, controls and stuff. I mentioned like you aim your little weapon with the mouse and you move around with like WASD, but you also use the arrow keys to control the camera. This is a really interesting like thing that it feels like it shouldn't work, but it's not like that unintuitive to go from here with your mouse in one hand and then switch, like do this little reach over. It's not been like a terrible issue in control. It's just a little strange. I definitely think that it could be a turnoff for some people, but I also haven't tried it on controller, and maybe the controls are less unusual on controls on a controller. I feel like they could be. I don't really know, because like I said, I didn't play with one. And you also have a lot of options in the options menu. I got pretty far into the game, and it took a little bit of like tweaking with settings and stuff, at least on the visual side, because when I first started playing, I was getting a little bit of motion sickness, a little bit of nausea, and I went into the settings and I found that there is a vignette, which I've mentioned before if you've seen other videos, that vignetting on games sets off my motion sickness for whatever reason, and turning that off and turning off some of the, I think there's a couple other post-processing things I turned off, I sort of stopped experiencing that motion sickness after that. But I looked through some of the settings and there seems to be a lot of settings in there if you need to tweak things or whatever, like I mentioned with having like settings for all these, turning off all these post-processing effects. Those aren't always a given in smaller games or like more indie games or whatever, so it's very nice to see them and be able to like really like dig into those and use them as needed, especially for like in my case, vignetting gives me motion sickness, so the option to turn off that sort of thing is really helpful so that I can actually continue to play the game. I beat like 2 or 3 bosses. I'm in either the third or the fourth area. I don't know how many areas there are. I don't know if there's like branching paths to any of that, but I have made it through a couple areas so far, and it's a roguelike, but it's relatively like forgiving, more on like the roguelite side of things, where like there's very clear and kept meta progression. Basically, you get through the sewers, this is what the first area was, you make it to, I think the second area was like the garden, you get a fast travel point, so that if you die and end up back at the the starting area, you can teleport to the beginning of the garden and then start there instead of having to go through the sewers again. And that's the same thing with the next area. So there's that sort of meta progression, as well as like there's a list on the wall in your safe room, whatever that place was called, that has like goals and things to check off, like do this and this and this and this, talk to this character, you know, defeat these bosses with M ranking, because it's got like a Devil May Cry style combo meter ranking thing. So it's very much on the meta progression side of the sort of like roguelike thing. I've got two more final points here that I got noted down here. The first one is to talk about like its sort of world building and lore, and like I mentioned, it has that sort of like meta narrative player versus game dev narrator thing going on. But within the sub narrative, the narrative that you play, you know, the game in, rather than that meta narrative, it's got an interesting world. It's set up as if it's sort of just like a post-apocalypse, zombie apocalypse thing. But like the further you go, the more you get little bits of something else. Like you want to do a succubus walking around the garden. You want to do this big gem person, I think February, and you talk to that person about like, I don't know, alien stuff and how they came from a different planet and they fought humans in the past or whatever sort of story that's going on there. There's a lot of like complexity and interesting layers to the world and the world building that it has. And so it'll be interesting to see what it does with all those like weird world elements and lore and narrative elements that it's set up, because like there is some narrative going on here with you finding this person who keeps sort of like making these fast travel points as you make it to the next end of the next area. Someone is opening these fast travel points so that you can travel between these places. They likely aren't doing it for you, so there's a mystery there. Like, why are they doing that? And who are some of the other people, like the shopkeeper? Who's that guy? Like these little things that are like, okay, we've got some little mysteries and little narrative threads to chase as a player, because like mystery is interesting to figure out, to find out and follow through and see where it's going. And you know, there's a little bit more narrative push than just sort of like, you are a survivor of a post-apocalypse and you need to find supplies or whatever. There's more to that that's just like pushing you to look into it. And then my last point, this isn't really like criticism or anything, it's just a thing to point out, is that this game has like an 18+ DLC, which I feel like is a little strange for the like type of game it is and like the way that it looks and all that. Like, it doesn't really feel like, at least from like a first glance, the type of game that would have that. It's there if that's the thing you're interested in looking at and checking out. I obviously can't show it to you, and I've not really played it yet, but it's free. So if you buy this, you would just have that, at least on Steam. I don't know what the situation is with the itch.io version. I didn't really look that closely at that version. I have it on Steam. So it's just like another thing that's there. It's a weird game that's just sort of like got a lot of stuff in it. A lot of ideas and concepts and pieces put together. And it's like, okay, how does this all come together in the end? You know, how does that's the part that I'm most interested in. And it is fun to play. And I do have a tendency to fall off roguelikes and stuff like this. But this one has a bit more of a steady progression to it from what I've played. I've not had a lot of trouble with bosses or anything. So I might make it further in this one than I do other games, like I said, because of that more clear, definitive progression. So I think that this game is probably worth checking out if you're interested in this type of game, this genre of game, be that like the roguelikes or this like isometric shooter thing. It's a little unusual, but it's also like a lot of elements that you'll probably recognize, and I don't think it's gonna be that hard to like pick up and play. But that's about, well, I gotta get to my thing. It passes tryout. That's my final verdict here, is just a pass. But yeah, that's about all I had to say about it, so let's get to the end bits here. If you want in the description, find a beacons.ai link that'll take you to all sorts of places, like my Patreon, Bandcamp, Redbubble, etc. Click that link, go to those places, do what you do there. Like the video if you liked it, dislike if you didn't, subscribe to keep up with this and other shows. Mostly this one, still chugging away on some other stuff that will hopefully come out eventually. That's what I keep saying. I said that one. Leave a comment. Have you played this? Have you played any games by this developer? There's a couple others. I not played them. Let me know in the comments what you think about all that. And share the video. Do things. Thanks so much for watching. And I'll see you next time. Bye.